The airport was loud, with the ordinary chaos of a Friday evening. Announcements echoed over the speakers, wheels of luggage rattled across the tile floor, and tired travelers shuffled toward their gates with coffee cups and phones pressed to their ears. In the middle of it all, Specialist Maria Alvarez stood quietly near Gate 14, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and her eyes fixed on the departure screen, willing it to show good news. She had been traveling for 3 days. What should have been a simple trip home had turned into a maze of canceled flights, missed connections, and long nights spent on uncomfortable airport chairs. She had left her base as quickly as she could after getting the call every soldier dreads receiving while stationed far from home. Her grandmother, the woman who had raised her after her parents passed away when she was young, had died peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was in 2 days, and Maria was determined to be there, no matter what it took. Her uniform was wrinkled now, the creases she had ironed so carefully days ago long gone. Her eyes were red, not just from exhaustion, but from the tears she had tried to hide in bathroom stalls and quiet corners of the airport. She missed her grandmother with a force that made it hard to breathe some moments. She kept picturing her grandmother's garden, the smell of fresh bread on Sunday mornings, the sound of her voice singing softly while she worked in the kitchen. Maria needed to say goodbye. She needed to sit in the front row and say goodbye properly. She approached the gate counter, her boarding documents in hand. As a service member traveling on military orders, she was flying standby, hoping for one of the seats set aside for uniformed personnel. She had done this before. It usually worked out, though not always without a wait. The gate agent, a thin man with tired eyes and a clipboard, glanced at her paperwork without much interest. "This flight is oversold," he said, not looking up. "Military standby doesn't guarantee a seat. You'll have to wait for the next available flight." Maria's heart sank. "Sir, I understand it's not guaranteed, but is there any chance?" "I said we're oversold," he repeated, sliding her papers back across the counter. "Next, please." She wanted to explain. She wanted to tell him about the funeral, about her grandmother, about how she had already missed one connection and could not afford to miss another, but the words caught in her throat. She had learned, over years of service, that pleading rarely changed anything, and she did not have the energy left to try. She nodded, picked up her papers, and stepped aside to let the next passenger through. She found a spot along the wall a short distance from the counter, away from the crowd gathering near the boarding line. She sat down on the floor, back against the cool wall, and pulled out her phone. On the screen was a photograph of her grandmother from last spring, standing in her garden in a faded blue apron, smiling the way she always smiled, like the whole world was a gift she had not expected, but was grateful for anyway. Maria stared at the photo until her vision blurred, and she quickly wiped her eyes before anyone could notice. She did not notice the man standing several feet away. He was tall, with silver hair cut close, and a posture that suggested decades of discipline, though nothing about his clothing gave that away. He wore a plain gray jacket over a simple shirt, comfortable slacks, and carried only a small leather bag. To anyone walking past, he looked like any other older gentleman traveling alone, perhaps a retired teacher, or a grandfather flying to visit family. There was nothing about his appearance that revealed he was a retired 3-star general, a man who had spent 38 years in uniform and had only just come from speaking at a Veterans Remembrance event 2 states away. He had been standing near the gate for the better part of 20 minutes, waiting for his own flight to begin boarding. He noticed Maria the moment she walked up to the counter. It was not just the uniform that caught his attention, though the uniform certainly did. It was something in the way she carried herself, the careful straightness of her back, even as exhaustion pulled at her shoulders, the quiet way she held her documents, the flicker of hope in her eyes when she first approached the counter. He watched the exchange at the counter unfold. He saw the gate agent barely glance up. He saw Maria's expression change, saw her nod and step away, saw the small, defeated slump of her shoulders as she walked to the wall and sat down. He recognized that look. He had seen it many times over the years, on the faces of young soldiers far from home, carrying burdens heavier than their duffel bags. He did not approach her. He did not want to draw attention, and more than that, he sensed she needed a moment alone. Instead, he stood quietly, watching the departure screen, thinking. He remembered his own years in uniform, the funerals he had missed because of deployments, the phone calls that came at the worst possible times, the guilt that lingered long after the missed goodbyes could no longer be undone. He remembered his own grandmother, and the promise he had made to himself decades ago that if he was ever in a position to make things a little easier for someone else, he would. He walked to the counter. The same gate agent looked up, his expression shifting slightly when he saw the new arrival, not because he recognized him, but because something about the man's calm, steady presence commanded a certain quiet respect, the kind that did not need explanation. "Excuse me," the general said, his voice even and unhurried. "I believe I'm in seat 2A on this flight. I'd like to give up my seat." The agent blinked. "Sir, that's a first-class seat. Are you sure? We can rebook you on a later flight, but there's no guarantee." "I'm sure," the man said simply. "Please give it to the young soldier who was just here." "The one in uniform." He nodded toward the wall where Maria sat, still unaware of the conversation taking place a short distance away. The agent hesitated, glancing between the general and Maria. "May I ask why, sir?" The general considered the question for a moment. "Because she needs to get home tonight, and I don't," he said. "That's really all there is to it." He did not offer his name. He did not mention his rank, his years of service, or the medals that sat in a box at home, rarely taken out, except for ceremonies he could not avoid. He simply handed over his boarding pass, thanked the agent, and stepped back from the counter. A few minutes later, the gate agent's voice came over the intercom, calling out a name. "Passenger Alvarez, please come to the counter." Maria looked up from her phone, startled. She glanced around, wondering if she had misheard. The agent called her name again, and she rose slowly, tucking her phone into her pocket and walking to the counter with a cautious, uncertain expression. "Ma'am," the agent said, sliding a new boarding pass across the counter, "there's been a seat change. You've been upgraded to first class. You'll be boarding shortly." Maria stared at the boarding pass, certain there had been some mistake. "I'm sorry. I was told the flight was oversold. I was on standby." A seat became available, the agent said simply, not offering further explanation. He seemed almost as puzzled as she was, though he did his best to keep his expression professional. Maria looked around the gate area, searching for some explanation, some sign of what had just happened. Her eyes moved across the rows of waiting passengers until they landed on a man standing near the window, calmly looking out at the runway. He seemed to sense her gaze, and he turned toward her. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded gate. He did not smile widely or wave her over. He simply gave a small, respectful nod, the kind exchanged between two people who understood something without needing to say it aloud. Then he turned back toward the window, unbothered, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. Maria wanted to say something. She wanted to thank him, to ask why, to understand what had just occurred. But something about his calm, quiet posture told her that questions were not necessary. Whatever had happened, he did not want recognition for it. She held the boarding pass against her chest for a moment, feeling tears prick at her eyes again. Different tears this time, not the tears of grief and exhaustion from before, but something gentler, something that felt almost like being seen. When boarding began, Maria walked down the jet bridge in a daze, still trying to process her unexpected change in fortune. She found her seat, sank into the soft leather, and allowed herself, for the first time in 3 days, to simply breathe. Halfway through the flight, a flight attendant leaned down beside her seat, speaking in a low, careful voice. "I don't usually say anything," the attendant began, "but I thought you might want to know. The gentleman who gave up his seat for you, that was General Whitfield. He's retired now, but he commanded thousands of soldiers during his career. He was coming back from speaking at a memorial event for fallen service members." Maria's breath caught in her throat. She had heard the name before, whispered with respect among older soldiers at her base, mentioned in passing during training on leadership and sacrifice. She had never imagined she would cross paths with him, let alone in a moment like this. "Does he do this kind of thing often?" Maria asked quietly. The flight attendant shook her head gently. "I don't know, but I do know he asked us not to make an announcement about it. He didn't want any fuss. I just thought, well, I thought you should know who to thank." even if you never get the chance to say it to him directly." Maria nodded, unable to speak for a moment. She looked out the window at the darkening sky, the clouds glowing faintly with the last light of the setting sun, and she thought of her grandmother again, of how she had always said that the world was full of quiet kindness, if only people took the time to notice it. Her grandmother had been the kind of person who gave without expecting anything back, who believed that the smallest gestures, offered without pride or announcement, often mattered the most. Maria realized, sitting in that comfortable seat thousands of feet above the ground, that she had just witnessed exactly the kind of kindness her grandmother had always believed in. The flight landed just after midnight. Maria gathered her things quickly, eager to make it to the funeral home before the service began the next morning. As she walked through the terminal, she scanned the crowd one more time, hoping for a chance to properly thank the general, but he was nowhere to be seen. He had likely already boarded a later flight, slipping quietly out of the airport the same way he had slipped into her evening, without fanfare, without expectation, without a single word spoken directly to her. The next morning, Maria stood at the front of a small church, surrounded by family members who had gathered to say goodbye to her grandmother. She wore her uniform, pressed and neat once more, and as the service began, she found herself thinking not only of her grandmother, but of the stranger who had made it possible for her to be there at all. During the eulogy, Maria spoke about her grandmother's garden, about the quiet lessons she had learned growing up in that small house, filled with warmth and patience. She spoke about how her grandmother had taught her that kindness did not need to be loud to be powerful, that the smallest acts, done without expectation of thanks, often left the deepest mark. As she spoke, she thought of the empty seat at gate 14, and the man who had given it up without a word. After the funeral, Maria tried to find out more about General Whitfield, hoping to send him a letter, a simple thank you for what he had done. She learned through contacts at her base that he rarely accepted personal thanks for anything, preferring instead that any gratitude be directed towards supporting other veterans and their families. So instead of a letter addressed only to him, Maria made a donation in his name to a kind of organization that helped young service members travel home during family emergencies, a small way of passing along the kindness she had received. Months later, back at her base, Maria kept a small photograph in her wallet, tucked behind the one of her grandmother. It was not a photograph of the general. She had never been able to find one from that night. Instead, it was a photograph she had taken herself, of an empty airport gate, the number 14 glowing softly above it. She kept it as a reminder. Not everyone who changes your life will ask for your thanks. Not every act of kindness needs to be witnessed to matter. Sometimes, a person simply notices someone else's burden, and quietly, without a word, chooses to make it a little lighter. Maria never forgot that night, and in the years that followed, she carried the lesson with her, into her own career, into the way she treated the young soldiers under her command, into the countless small moments when she, too, had the chance to give something up so someone else could get where they needed to go. She never saw General Whitfield again, but she never needed to. He had already given her everything he meant to give: a seat, a moment of grace, and a lesson that would last far longer than any flight ever could.